Gender bias in this industry is way too real to ignore. With over 55% of women who make up for the food service industry, only 20% of those women are in executive leadership roles, and only 12% of them hold a title of an executive chef. Those numbers are sobering, but they also highlight the real opportunity for change. It's not about fixing women, it's about fixing leadership. It's about recognizing the skill sets, the perspectives, and potential that already exist on your team. It's about understanding how gender expectations shape leadership perception and asking ourselves, how can we lead differently? How can we show up? And most of us want to show up differently. They just don't know how. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to give you real solutions, real, tangible, actionable insights. We have some really incredible folks on this call today that are going to be speaking to what's happening in the space. Julie Swift is the founder of the Food Service Women's Alliance. She's a visionary leader who's been at the forefront of advancing equity and allyship and connection across the food service space. Kelly Lockwood Primus is the CEO of Leading Now, an official partner of FWA, and is a global expert on inclusive leadership, organizational culture, and really building out the frameworks for actionable insight for companies to take action and build into their culture. And Sho Shafiei, CEO of DSA Digital Signage, an accomplished operator, innovator, and advocate for building people-first, tech-forward workplaces. We're going to unpack what it means to reset leadership beyond awareness into deliberate action and to challenge the old systems that no longer serve us. We challenge you to drop your thoughts, statements, and questions into the chat. Now, some of you have shown up in a quiet manner, and that's great. We're so happy that you're here. Whether you're just here to listen, to learn, to get yourself on a baseline of where you're at and where are the areas of improvement. We want to have this conversation in real time. We want this to be authentic, honest, transparent, and open. If you want to stay on the anonymous side, submit those questions. The only people on this call that can see it is myself and the fellow panelists. And we're happy to extend out our calendars beyond this webinar today and to really provide that actionable insight and those systems. So let's jump in and let's talk about the fact that the food service industry doesn't have a talent problem. It has a mindset problem. And Julie, I'm going to kick it over to you to start off. What do we mean by deliberate action? And what are we talking about here as far as the mindset problem goes in leadership today?
Well, thanks, Hannah, and for the other panelists as well for being here and being ready and open to have this conversation transparently, like you said. I think there's really power in just laying it out there. So one of the things that we think about when we think about a mindset problem, this is really a massive opportunity, if I'm just being totally honest, because the intention to do good, the intention to be a high EQ leader is there from the vast majority of those who are leading in our industry today, whether men or women. But what's not there is the awareness and the unintentional things that are happening and happening pretty rampantly. So if we think about like what the intention is and what women are experiencing, there's a significant gap there. So anytime you have a group of people who really want to knock it out of the park, but aren't, you have a massive opportunity. So that's the way that I look at it. And some of those things, I know that this might feel like a seismic shift in people's heads. But in reality, it's a small shift. It's small tweaks that will lead to a seismic result. So it isn't about asking for the moon. It really is about asking for a few tweaks that are going to make this industry and the women in it feel more inclusive and be a part of good business models.
Yeah. And it seems like, especially in the food service industry, there's a lot of cronyism. There's a lot of, well, I know this person, so I'm going to bring them over because we feel comfortable. Kelly, we were speaking about this earlier. People feel comfortable when they're mentoring or bringing in folks that look like them, that think like them. Kelly, can you speak to that a little bit more with this group? What are the implications of just bringing in people that look like us?
Sure. So, the challenge always is when you go to work for a new company, and as an executive or a senior leader, right, you've got goals, you've got things you've got to do, whether you're making change happen or so forth. It's really easy, and we're all guilty of it. We go back and steal the people that we worked with someplace else, and we bring them with us. And I've done this multiple times in my own career. But what I didn't realize was, by constantly having the same people on my team, yes, we were successful, but how much more could we have accomplished if we had a broader spectrum of ideas or perspectives? And so one of the biggest challenges for leaders, right? We've got a short window in any case when you're on the C-suite to impact change within your organization. We get that, right? You've got to demonstrate your capabilities. You've got to help do whatever it is that the organization needs you to do. But imagine if you took just a few minutes every day to step back and say, hey, why don't I ask this person over here their idea? Because you'll be surprised at how much experience is in your organization that you've never had yourself, right? So it's really important for us as leaders to constantly ask questions of the people that we work with who aren't our usual person we go to. Julie, you and I talked about this the other day, didn't we? When you were having a conversation with the CEO and you asked the question, who's at your table, right?
Yeah, it's almost like, when was the last time you showed up in a meeting and said, hey, I've invited Kelly here today because I already know she sees it very differently than me. I already know that she's got a different idea about this, and frankly, she disagrees with me. And I find such value in that because I know that if we can get those ideas out on the table, we can all solve this better together. But that particular CEO was really like shocked at the idea. I even asked the question, like, who's around the table? And are they doing this when you speak? Because if they are, there's a red flag.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that can be a pivotal moment, right? And on the latter side of that, by not doing that, actually recognizing that it's holding back innovation and that it is impacting the bottom line. And I think that's been a very common conversation piece. How can I measure this? How can this really impact my bottom line? And is there anything that you all can speak to that you recognize that was that pivotal moment where whether the CEO or leadership came to you and said, hey, we want to value your diverse perspective, or the latter of a moment that held you back, that was bias influenced? Sho, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Uh, I think I think a lot of folks on the call might know this. Unlike everybody else, I did not grow up in the food industry. So just to set the base, I grew up in the automotive industry, which is another industry that's heavily dominated by men, but it doesn't have that 55-60% baseline of women that don't get promoted. It's already got a very small funnel. So going from that small funnel to the top, it's even tougher. I transitioned to the hospitality environment about 6.5 years ago. But when I think back on what qualified me to even be a CEO of a manufacturing company in this industry, was the positions that I held prior to this. Yes, I didn't know hospitality, but I was a damn good operator and I could run a manufacturing plant no matter what it was building. And I owe that to a few people at my last organization, but one that really comes to mind was a gentleman that held a position that was at least about 3 layers above me. So he wasn't officially a mentor of mine, but I worked within his business unit, within his organization, and I can honestly tell you, I was one of the hardest working people in that entire place. But this was early 2000s, and I was just going through a phase in life where I was very expressive with my maybe attire and my looks. I had kind of short, spiky hair, a little shorter than Kelly's, but they came in very unusual colors. Like I had my vibrant purple and blue and green, and it was flavor of the week. Every week it would be something different, and but it didn't really have any impact on my work ethics, on what I accomplished, hitting due dates. I went on with my business, running my department like everybody else did. And a couple times where I thought I was going to be considered for a promotion, I thought I was the most qualified. I was kind of passed on. And in the back of my head, I was wondering why, and I didn't know. So this gentleman who was the highest level in the organization we were in asked if I would participate in a 360 feedback. And I was like, sure, why not? You know, we do every other kind of feedback and personality study. What's one more? So I did that. And when the results came in, typically your direct supervisor, your manager at the time, sits down with you and goes through it. I went through all that. Some of it was hurt my feelings a little bit, and some of it I thought it was misread. But he asked if it was okay for him to sit down and give me feedback on it. And I accepted kind of hesitantly because I'd already been told everything that was in the darn report. And we sat down, we went through the whole thing, and then he said, I wanna be transparent and give you something that may not show up in words here, but it's what's the perception out there. And I think you should know what your perception is. And made me think. And then he told me, he said, you know, your performance doesn't change because you look different, but your perception does. You don't work for Google, you don't work for Facebook, you don't live in the Bay Area. You work for a diesel engine manufacturer in central Indiana. The people who are making decisions on who should move up are different than executives that are in maybe some other parts of the country. And you got to be aware of where you work. I'm not agreeing with their perceptions. I'm simply telling you that because you may not be aware that how you dress and how you look is having an impact on your career. Do with it what you wish, but if you want to entertain me, give it a try. Go to your natural color for a few weeks and see what happens. Right off the bat, I was honestly offended. I was a little taken back. I may have even shed a tear or two on my way home, but I thought about it. I thought about the C-suite at the company. And to this date, they're still one of the most inclusive companies. And even though it was 50% women in the C-suite, none of them looked like me. And I chose to actually take his feedback and do that small change. And it literally changed the trajectory of my career. I moved up so fast to the point that I got to a point that I was like, this is a little too fast. I need to pause. It could have gone totally differently. I could have walked into the HR office and placed a complaint that he is giving me feedback that has nothing to do with my performance and he's literally judging my looks. I could have done that. I chose not to because I trusted him. I knew the type of leader he was. I knew that he honestly wanted to see me grow. There was nothing in him for pointing that out, but to help me overcome that hurdle.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of went on a rant, but I think the point I was trying to make is, and I'm hoping there are plenty of men here that might be hesitant to give that kind of honest feedback to some of their female employees. And it doesn't have to be about their hair, just in general, being afraid of how it might be perceived. But if you truly care about their growth, you should give them that feedback. You should be transparent. You should be honest, but it also requires you to have the perception out there that you are an authentic leader, that you are doing this for a good reason. You are trustworthy. It makes a huge difference. So
Yeah,
that's
Kelly,
my 2
Kelly, do you want to speak to the trust part of this?
Well, you know, one of the biggest challenges that that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is that there's a discomfort to how you interact with those who report to you in a lot of places. And it's not easy, right? Being human is not easy. Leading others is not always going to be easy. And whether you are good at giving feedback or you're good at taking feedback is always going to be a challenge. However, if you can build the relationships that you need with the people who report to you, right? And or across the organization and come in and say, listen, I'm not going to give you all the answers because I don't know them. Or I'm working on learning how to be more inclusive. I truly want to be. I think I am, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it, right? So there's things that can be done as a leader that it's okay to say you don't know all the answers. When it comes to relationships, when it comes to how can I best support you in your role? I may be doing something completely wrong and I don't know that.
Right.
So part of this is about how do you build a one-on-one relationship that's based on trust, that you make sure that they know that what they say to you isn't going to be held against them when, you know, the next review time comes. And take a look at yourself as a leader. Do you accept feedback well? Do you actually let people tell you what they think or how they're experiencing you? Because if you're not doing that, then you're never going to hear the truth.
Yeah.
So
And
it's really, really important that you recognize that you're building a one-on-one relationship with these people, right? And it's not just about directing them on what they need to get done or measuring their success in their role. It's also about getting to know them so that you can share with them how you're experiencing them.
human to human, remembering that we're all human and it's not just this transactional experience that we're having in the workforce. We're building relationships. We spend so much time working. And so it really becomes this opportunity to, like you're saying, Kelly, and Sho, like that feedback loop is so important, and having the courage to give and the courage to receive and to do something with that. And mentorship comes to mind, and Julie, allyship within this organization, and how much you've promoted that, how important mentors are, even the ones that don't directly you report to. Can you speak to a little bit how that's this tool that is underutilized within the workforce?
Yeah, I think when people think of mentorship, for one thing, they think about the fact that they've got to be, oh, well, when I get this or this role, I'll be ready to mentor someone. No, exactly where you are with the experiences you have today. I don't care if you're junior to the person you're mentoring, they're going to learn something from you. And I think that's really, really important. Also think that when we think about allyship, and a lot of confusion happens when people talk about mentorship versus allyship versus advocacy versus sponsorship. That's actually one of my experiences weaves into this perfectly. So thank you for asking that question. For all the nicks and cuts that I gathered along the way, I've been in this industry over 3 decades. So when I think about the kind of experiences that happened in the beginning of my career, they were very overt. And a lot of times that's what people think about when they think about, oh, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy, or at least I'm not as bad as her. You know, And the reality is, it's actually those little subtle things that hamper your spirit and that tell you you are not valued here. So I recently had an experience. I was just at IFMA President's Conference. It was fabulous, by the way. And I took a moment to pull someone aside who had not only advocated for me, but sponsored me. And when I say sponsored, I'll explain what I mean by that. So I was coming off of a very bad breakup with a previous company and had decided to start my own consulting business in food service. And he was the first person to hire me. I'm not going to mention his name because I didn't ask him in advance if I could, but if he's on, he'll know I'm talking to him. But I was able to pull him aside. He was getting ready to walk into the main session. And I said, I need you to come here. I need to speak to you. I didn't realize at the time that you did this, what you did for me. But you basically hired me. This is a Fortune 500 company who said, we need what you have for this next chapter of where we're going. Can we work something out? He signaled multiple other leaders in this space. He referred me. He shared his experience. He spoke my name in rooms that I was not present in. That is sponsorship. He invited me to have a seat at the table. He invited me to come in and do a team session to talk about FWA because he knew I was standing both things up at one time. And I needed to look that man in the eyes and tell him what he did for me, not just me personally, but for my business. And so that's very recent. But I can tell you that the unintended slights, yes, you've got a seat at the table, Julie. What else could you want? You're here, right? If you weren't here, we wouldn't be too worried about whether or not we're getting someone's opinion, but you're here. Well, I might have been there, but my voice was not appreciated. It was not accepted. It was not valued. So how do leaders adjust in that when they think they're doing the right thing? And that's where, back to mentorship, every leader needs to be mentored. I recommend if you're a male leader in this industry, that you be mentored by a female. That is a way to get a vision on what you're after. You see yourself as a high EQ leader?
Don't you love that? I love when people call themselves a high EQ leader and they're throwing it around like hotcakes, but
Exactly.
the reality
Look,
is in practice.
If you don't have empathy, if you're not self-reflective and self-aware, and you're not building and driving inclusivity in your organization, you're not a high EQ leader.
There's a really interesting program that we did, started a couple of years ago. It was a reverse mentoring program, and it happened to be in a completely different industry. But it was an industry with a very large male leadership, just across the entire industry. But what they realized was that they were lacking, right, the knowledge and the know-how on how to lead non-males. And so we put together a reverse mentoring program for them, and it ended up being, it's a 6-month program. It's very structured. It's put in a way so that both the female mentors and the male leaders, right, who were the mentees or proteges, had an opportunity to have conversations that were structured in a way no one felt uncomfortable. Information was provided so that they could have knowledge and learning, so that the interactions were not uncomfortable. And it turned out to be one of the best programs. And they had to, it was a bit of a challenge to recruit 25 male leaders within this organization who were willing. So, you got about 10 of them who were like, oh, I'm all in. Another 10 go, oh, maybe I'm on the fence. And 5 are like, why are we doing this? Like, what is this? And why am I even here? By the end of it, though, those 5 were like, I want to do this again. I want to to have the opportunity in an environment where it's completely safe for me to learn the experiences of these women who are working their way through our organization so that I can be a better leader. And those kinds of opportunities really bring eye openers to the male leaders. And I think it's a wonderful way to either reaffirm you really are a good EQ leader, or whether or not you need some work, or you're not even close to getting started, right? So, but those are the types of opportunities that help get mind shifts going, right? And that's really what we're talking about, is leading that shift. So there's
Yeah.
an opportunity. That's the kind of program that you can put in place that makes it easy for folks to recognize what it is they're doing if they're unaware.
I also think by the time folks get to that level of leadership, you know, they've been trained in financial acumen. They have been trained in operations, in sales, in marketing. They're all of these things, but they haven't been trained in this. Even if
Right.
they've had a front row seat to, you know, driving, you know, vibrant cultures and all of those kinds of things. And so there's this fear factor
Yeah.
that sits in there. This is a vulnerable thing for a
Yes.
leader to do, right,
Exactly.
Kelly?
It's first off, no one at that level wants to show up as a fool or an idiot or unknowing.
Right.
So they avoid it as much as possible. But the challenge is that's the last step. That's the last thing that you really have to master. If you have all of those other skills, if you've already understand how to run the business, if you already understand, you know, how to help the organization reach its strategic goals. The problem is that talent in this industry is critical to success for all of the operators, right? For everyone. And so with the range of generations in the workforce, what are these leaders doing in order to get comfortable with those interactions? Because that's ultimately where trust has to happen, your ability to lead others has to happen. And you have to recognize that there are whole populations of people who completely approach work differently than you do.
Yeah, and I think about that because I think about how critical it is that the leader goes first. The leader of the organization goes first, and how critical that is, because that's where the impact lies. If we think back, Kelly, to that story I told you in that same CEO, he couldn't believe how many people in the room, after he sort of called out this one individual and said, she's here today because we need to hear what she has to say, and that's valuable to me. And she disagrees with me and all that. Well, guess what? He found out more than half the people in the room also disagreed with him. And it was now safe to say that out loud. You know, Sho, I think about it. I've seen you in action with your people and at some of the shows, and the way you approach, like what you've experienced in this industry has shaped who you are as a leader. I just, like, it's the secret sauce. How do you, like, when you think about activating that in a way that's meaningful, like all the way down your organization, like, give us some nuggets of gold there, because you're doing it.
Honestly, I think Kelly spoke to self-awareness, like understanding that no matter how strong of a leader you think you are, we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths. And that goes across the board. I am a huge fan of focusing on everybody's strengths rather than trying to shape a square into a round hole. And I know that in my team, there are people who really understand like the industry better. They just do, they've been in it longer. So rather than me trying to guess it or figure it out, I just honestly ask them, what do you think? You've been doing this for 20 years. What have you seen? And then there are pieces where I know that I probably have hit my head a few more times and I may have learned a few more lessons. We actually have a fairly young leadership team, and I love that. Our manufacturing, we have people who've been here for 36 years, 30, 29, like they're all up there. So they have the real experience of how to build things and how to be efficient and all that. But when it comes to, like, let's say marketing or engineering, we have a lot of folks that are still in their 20s, maybe just crossed 30. The leadership that worked for me when I was 20 something coming up as an engineer is not going to work for the engineer that just graduated 5 years ago. If I want to sit there and be absolutely delusional thinking, hey, when I was growing up, this is what my boss did and it worked for me, then if I do the same thing, it's going to work for, Nolan. That's what I am. I'm delusional. It's like, your dad always telling you, well, when I was growing up, your grandpa did this. Well, and you resent him for it. So why are you passing that on to me? So having that mindset of every individual is different, they're unique. There's a reason you hired them, because you saw something very unique when you hired that person. So speaking to them is going to be a little different. You cannot have a speech that you literally rehearse and repeat with every single leader. I have a completely different way of talking to every single individual in my team. But I also know their families. I know the name of their kids. I know what grade they are, what they like. Like, you got to be able to have those human interactions. If every conversation you ever have with someone in your team is about work, you're a terrible leader, because you see them as nothing but a tool to make the company grow. You got to treat them like individuals. You got to know who they are, what speaks to their heart, what motivates them, what demotivates them. And taking the time to get to know people is an investment. But I feel like hiring new people is also an investment. Between recruiting fees and 6 months to a year of training before they're up to speed, keep the good people you have. Like, be a rubber, be agile, like adjust yourself to their ways rather than sitting there like a rigid stone and expect everybody to like meet your needs.
Right. So whose job is this to fix? And is it the women on these teams to coach up or to fix? What really, because from my own experience in the past of my career, I always felt like, okay, I got to approach this like I'm walking on eggshells and I really want to give feedback, but I'm a little afraid that they're going to put me in a box and just say, oh, there goes Hannah again with her emotions, and there, that creates this tension. It creates this burden that is not why I signed up for this role. And so does anyone want to kind of speak to whose job is it to fix what is this systemic opportunity in this space?
Well, Kelly's face is turning redder than mine, so I'm definitely going to defer to her. I know we both have a lot of passion about this, so.
Well, I'm also red because I've got the heat blasting in my office. So apologies for that. I kept thinking, how do I turn the little heater off and not leave my screen? But yeah, I do have a very strong perspective with this. After I don't even know how many years in corporate America, when I moved into the leadership space back in 2011, I think it was. From that time until now, so 14 years of research and learning and conversations and discussions, ultimately, the culture of your organization is led by the senior leadership team, whether that's the C-suite plus the next level down or so forth. The challenge becomes, until that group actually changes the way they treat each other and the organization, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change, because you can't ask the people who are the recipients of the bad behavior or the lack of support or the lack of mentoring. They can't fix the problem. So I recognize organizations put in place BRGs and ERGs or whatever you wanted to call them, and they're nice to have because they're giving some support to the individual. But if there are not executives who are running those initiatives within the organization and taking it back to the C-suite to say, hey, we've got a problem. As a culture, we have these situations happening. How do we fix that? Because until that, and I forget who said it, and I apologize, whoever's quote this is that I'm ruining, but basically the culture of your organization is the worst behavior you accept. So if you have leaders who mistreat people, but you keep them in that role because they're high performers or they're outperforming the competition or they have some skill set, knowledge, whatever, understand and recognize that's your culture. And until such time as the organization says, and the leadership says, we're not going to do that anymore. There are ways to identify where the challenges are. There are ways to recognize and assess how your organization is being experienced by everybody else and not just the leaders. And the fact of the matter is, you can also run into organizations where the senior leadership team, the C-suite, is all on board to make change. And then they have this frozen tundra below them who have absolutely no opinions on it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to change. They've been doing this for 30 years and everything works. So why is there still a problem, right? And so these are the kinds of things that when we have conversations with CEOs, the questions come out and say, well, is that something you experience? Or how about 2 levels down? What are they experiencing? And part of that is always just asking questions and saying, let's look into that. Yep. Because it's not that you're wrong. It's just that you haven't shifted your mindset to recognize it could be different. And as such, driving innovation, driving retention, getting the most out of the investments in the resources that you have without having to deal with churn, burnout, and all of these other things that are causing organizations to struggle, right, within the industry. So talent wins every time.
And staying curious too. Even in personal relationships, the moment that you stop being curious about the other person, your perception of them comes to a halt. And so really leaning in and staying curious and asking questions is definitely an example of what needs to stay in the leadership playbook. Yes. Or be expressed at a deeper level in the leadership playbook, which, speaking of playbook, Julie, we just launched a playbook. So can you speak to what's staying and what's got to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and Christy, thank you for putting in the chat and being the wind beneath our wings, behind the scene, running the Zoom. She's put a lot of things in the chat for you to explore there, along with our information, should you want to contact any of us. But one of the things that's got to go is going to the most marginalized people in your organization to fix your organization. That's the wrong place to start. I can't tell you how many leaders have said to me, well, you know, we have a woman in senior leadership. And I asked her, am I that guy? Okay, so number one, if you have to ask that question, dude, you're that guy. Okay, I'm sorry, but you are. And I know that might not be your intention. How you're showing up may not be what you're intending. But at the end of the day, you have to own it. HR is a key stakeholder. Your leadership team are key stakeholders, but if you're leading that company, you have to own it. So that needs to stay for sure. One of the things I think that has to go is this I'm in charge attitude. It's my responsibility to make sure this organization is successful. Can I just count up in years how much of my energy, time, and effort I spent calibrating myself so that I didn't make that dude feel like I wasn't going to follow whatever he decided. The reality is, you're the CEO or president, or you're in charge of a certain department. Ultimately, the decision is yours. Why wouldn't you ask people what they think? Why wouldn't you invite that? I'm telling you, if you invited me and you allowed me to weigh in and you decided on something completely different, by golly, I'm behind you. Even bigger than I may have been behind you before, because you valued me enough to ask me my opinion. It's not going to hurt you to ask for that opinion, to ask for that out loud. The other thing that needs to go is this idea, and I'm going to call it a performance review test. So this happens all throughout the year, but the performance review test is, go back and look at previous performance reviews you've done on people that work for you, and lay the male and the female ones down beside each other. Because I'll tell you, what is rampant in this industry is calling out women for being emotional on their performance review, calling out women for being too aggressive, which just means that we spoke up like any male on the team would speak up, but yet it's seen differently. I also I'm speaking to you when I say, I want you to recognize for every woman, almost every single woman, there's some kind of intersectionality that is impacting them in an even more negative way, whether that's a hidden disability, whether it is that there's ageism in place on both sides, young and older. I know women have been in the industry for 20 years who still get into this idea because they look young, or they're short statured, or they're beautiful, or whatever it is that they are, that they're being judged as not as effective, just simply based on their appearance. The intersectionality of skin color, being from a different country, speaking with an accent, too tall, too short, wore heels, shouldn't have worn sneakers. It is exhausting. And if I had all the hours back that I spent calibrating myself and trying to dress the right way and trying to show up the right way, and you guys, I've been in a room as a senior vice president with a room full of men that I didn't know, who automatically assumed I was the note taker and that I was to get coffee for everyone. For real, in the last 5 years, not 30 years ago, in the last 5 years. So I do think, gosh, you put that question out. Love to know what the others think, but this idea of what has to stay and what has to go, look, if you lead from that place of vulnerability and just willingness to do great things for the business and have everybody on your team show up in that way. One more thing that I'll say is an absolute hack. If you have an only on your leadership team, one woman, or in the case of women, one man, which is much more rare. But if you have an only on your team, I beg you, when you walk out of that meeting, have a private conversation with that woman and ask her, did you feel heard in that meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like you could speak up? I noticed you were talked over. Those things are power. Then as you readdress the group, what's not about saying, hey, I talked to Julie when we left the last meeting. She's really not feeling hurt. No, like, please don't do that. It is more, how do you demonstrate? Someone interrupts me, interrupt them and say, hey, I think Julie is finishing her thought here. Or someone represents my ideas their own 5 minutes after I said it. Hey, I think Julie just said that a few minutes ago. Let's build on that. I'm glad you have the same opinion. There are ways to really get at that. And that is all about, you kind of led with this, but this idea of just being human, like, drop the BS old mindset of what it now means you're supposed to act like because you're a leader. Act like you, dude, be the best version of yourself. And people will show up for you in ways that you never even anticipated if you can do that. Because guess what? The women on this screen, we're not used to that. It's different. You want the X factor for how to break this thing wide open for your company. This is the secret sauce.
We're getting some really great questions in the chat. Kelly, did you want to talk
No,
to
I
that?
was just going to say, download the playbook that's on the FWA website. It's there for everybody. And it gives you all kinds of scenarios and things and ways to look at perhaps this situation that you've had happen once or twice over the last year or two. Maybe this is how you could show up a little differently, right? So it was put together knowing and recognizing that finding that information is not always easy. So link just went into the chat. Go there and download it, because honestly, it's a great first step. It's a great way to just start to recognize some of the things that your people are feeling, or how they're perceiving you, right? And how you could show up differently.
Being curious about yourself and getting a baseline as really check yourself. You might wake up every day and you're like, I'm a great leader. I had this really deep conversation with Hannah. It built trust, and I know that she's going to speak highly of me. Check yourself. And we're getting some really good questions in on the chat. And one thing that popped in is there's a little bit of a fear factor about potentially losing your job if you go to HR or even your leadership team and have feedback, whether it's a complaint, whether it's something very black and white, like, hey, this is not conducive to a good workplace culture. And so oftentimes leadership, CEOs, they say, okay, what's our core values? What's our mission statement? What's our vision statement? Let's put it in a little book and make everyone memorize it. That's culture. Well, we all know that it's not. And so when it comes to whether you're a male or female in the organization, when you're giving that feedback, what's the best approach here without feeling like you're going to risk your job?
Great question. I'd love Sho, can you, hey, you run an organization. How do you take feedback? What does that look like for you?
So I think one of the first things is I am not afraid of saying I may have been wrong, or just showing some vulnerability every now and then to show that you're also human. Your title doesn't make you different. I know I make mistakes. I'm sure I've made mistakes since I've been here this morning. I mean, it happens. And I think being available, and if the lowest position within your organization feels comfortable saying good morning to you, feels comfortable walking to your office, to do something as simple as over the weekend, as a single dad, this happened, so I'm just going to use it as an example. A single dad said, over the weekend, I had the girls, and we did a bunch of drawings, and here they made a drawing with your name on it. When somebody who is an hourly worker working for you feels comfortable enough to walk up and talk to you about something that's completely not work related, they can tell you if they don't feel comfortable with something. And every now and then, what you attract, there's a con to that. You may have a lot of people just coming to you to complain about somebody else on the team. And you got to be able to say, well, let's call them up. Let's figure it out. Let's see why they did it. Always assume that they had the best intentions, but let's call them out. When you do that, people don't just talk behind. They learn the value of transparency. Next time they just walk up to the guy and say, hey, you did this and I didn't like it, man. Don't do it. They don't get you involved. But you gotta be human before you're a leader or any title.
Julie, you're muted.
Sorry, that fear is so real. When you said that question was in the chat, I had an internal gasp that I literally was triggered by, because I can remember those moments in my own career where it is like, how am I going to address this? And the reality is, look, if enough leaders, and I believe they will, in this awareness evolve, that's where the talent's going. Those women are not going to speak up. If you don't make it safe for them to speak up, they're not going to. They're going to continue calibrating. They're going to think of that work environment as toxic to them, and they're going to move on. So that fear is real. The fear is part of what motivated us to start this thing. It is the absolute reason that we don't take sponsors. You might recognize they're not big, brands associated with this, and we certainly have been offered that opportunity to have sponsors. The reason we don't is because the minute those companies write that check to us, they're gonna be a little resistant to us telling them what they don't want to hear. And we need something way more valuable than any check they could write us. We need them in this. We need that desperately. We need you in it. And a group of leaders, a handful of leaders, is the start of that momentum. It's why we wanted to come on here and have this conversation right out loud. Just honestly, we want to remove the limitations that exist for making this progress, not just on behalf of women, not just on behalf of marginalized people, but on your behalf, on the behalf of leaders, to build places that, guess what, are going to be better for you to work in too. It really does go back to being human.
And if I may add, I think one thing that's so unique about the hospitality industry that I personally haven't seen it elsewhere, it is incredibly relationship based. People know each other. Even if they leave jobs, they go to, other companies, they stay within the same ecosystem. And people talk, they share experiences. You should know, based on the people who have worked there and left that company, what kind of culture you're in. It's not that difficult to figure out. I feel like in my limited time, I have kind of figured out, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing today, who would I want to work for? And there is a handful that you would never. I would rather be sweeping floors somewhere than work for certain organizations as a C-suite executive. Be aware when you accept a job, when you're even interviewing for a job. Put some weight behind the culture there. Talk to people who've been there for a while. Talk to people who used to be there and left, and get honest feedback. If you get like completely consumed by the title you're receiving and the compensation, you may find yourself in that situation where you want to give feedback, but you don't feel comfortable. And now your lifestyle depends on that level of income. It's going to be really hard to jeopardize it. So part of it is like advanced planning. Don't put yourself in those situations.
Yeah. Too often are these conversations happening at the exit, if at all. And it's, I had all these things I wanted to say, but I never had the tools or the resources to say them in a way that was conducive to potentially saving my job and being on the team. And I think that starts to fracture over time. And that's when you get enough of that, especially in food service, especially in the restaurant business, we've accepted as an industry, it's a revolving door. People come and go. People don't want to stay here forever. I've been in food and bev my entire career, since I was 14 years old scooping ice cream. We don't leave food and bev. We're a part of this industry forever. And so I think that we're missing a huge opportunity in this industry alone. We've got about 5 minutes left. So out of respect of everyone's time, I want to make sure we end on time. We will take any last minute questions. And if we don't get them on this call, you have access to all of us. We have a massive group of wonderful professionals as a part of FWA. We have these resources, and Kelly, you've built this beautiful playbook and this partnership with FWA, and you're implementing this in real time. And if there's anything that you want to speak to in terms of just, it's not just training, it's transforming, and then we'll close out.
So the only thing I do want to say is that playbook is FWA's. I had an opportunity to preview it, but it's not mine. It is
Okay.
was created by Julie and her team specifically for this reason, right? Now, we do partner with FWA, and we are here as a professional development organization, a partner in order to help the industry address these issues, because it's been going on forever and it's not getting better. And until the day comes when senior leaders step up and say, yeah, I want to be that person. I want to be the person that everybody wants to work for. And if you start by even just reading the playbook, it's one way of starting to shift your mind about what does leadership today look like and what should it look like. Because it should be everybody's goal to say, that's the boss I want, that guy or that woman, I want to work for her or him. So there's a lot of resources on the new website.
Yes, it looks so great. Julie knocked it out of the park.
Oh, well, that wasn't me. I assure you, we had agencies step up and do this work on the rebrand. Just a quick shout out, Supper Co. did the rebrand of FWA. Matato put the playbook into that beautiful digital form. Also, you can download a PDF. And SROC absolutely rocked our faces off with the new website. Kelly, you rocked our faces off with bringing your learning and development and the key differentiators, leadership differentiator tool, and those kinds of things to our website. So you have a mighty set of resources behind you all as leaders. The question is, what will you do?
Right.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your time today on behalf of all of the women and men as a part of the Food Service Women Alliance. We're so grateful for everyone that took the time. This was a recorded session, so we will be sharing amongst your networks, and feel free to share within your teams as well, because this is just the beginning of a much needed conversation, and we will be having more of these conversations to come.